The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the dusty square of Tombstone, Arizona. And Rose Navarro felt her heart stop beating as the crowd of men leaned forward to see what unfortunate soul would be sold next on this scorching August afternoon in 1882. She stood on the platform with her hands bound in front of her, the rope cutting into her wrists as the sun beat down mercilessly on her dark hair. Her father had died 3 weeks ago from a rattlesnake bite, leaving behind nothing but debts to every merchant and saloon owner in town, and the bank had wasted no time seizing their small property and demanding payment. When Rose could not produce the money, the sheriff had declared her an indentured servant to be auctioned off to the highest bidder, who would pay her father's debts in exchange for 7 years of her labor. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his shirt, gestured toward her with exaggerated showmanship. "Here we have Miss Rose Navarro, age 21, healthy as a horse and strong as they come. She can cook, clean, sew, and work a garden. Starting bid is $200 to cover the debts owed." Rose kept her chin up despite the humiliation burning through her chest. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd, recognizing most of the faces from town. There were ranchers, merchants, drifters, and men she had never seen before. But one face made her blood run cold. Clayton Mercer stood at the front of the crowd, his cruel smile spreading across his weathered face like a disease. Everyone in Tombstone knew Mercer's reputation. He was the wealthiest rancher for 100 miles, and also the cruelest. The Mexican and Chinese workers who escaped his ranch told stories of brutal beatings, starvation wages, and treatment worse than animals received. 2 of his servants had died under mysterious circumstances, but the sheriff never investigated because Mercer owned half the town. $200, called a voice from the back. $250, Mercer countered immediately, his eyes fixed on Rose with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The bidding continued, but it quickly became clear that no one wanted to compete with Mercer. The other bidders dropped out one by one, unwilling to make an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. Rose's breathing became shallow as she realized what was about to happen. 7 years with Clayton Mercer would be a death sentence or worse. $300, Mercer said with finality, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Going once, going twice. $500. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, deep and steady, cutting through the murmuring like a knife. Every head turned to see who had spoken. A tall man stepped forward, leading a beautiful bay horse by the reins. He wore dusty traveling clothes, a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips like it belonged there. When he pushed his hat back, Rose could see he was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and striking blue eyes that seemed almost out of place in his weathered face. A dark stubble covered his strong jaw, and his brown hair was long enough to touch his collar. "Who the hell are you?" Mercer demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his own weapon. "Name is Blake Donovan," the stranger said calmly, his eyes never leaving the auctioneer. "I have $500 in gold, and I am making a bid." The auctioneer looked between Mercer and the stranger nervously, clearly not wanting to anger the powerful rancher but legally obligated to accept the higher bid. "That is quite a sum, sir. Do you have the funds?" Blake reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch, which he tossed to the auctioneer. The man caught it and opened it, his eyes widening at the gold coins inside. "Yes, sir, this is more than sufficient." $600, Mercer snarled, his face flushing red with anger. $1,000, Blake countered without hesitation. A collective gasp went through the crowd. That was an enormous sum, more than most men in Tombstone made in 2 years. Mercer's jaw clenched so hard Rose could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. He stared at Blake with undisguised hatred, clearly trying to decide if this stranger was worth the expense of bidding higher. "That is 4 times her father's debt," Mercer said coldly. "What makes you think she is worth that much?" Blake's expression remained neutral, but there was something hard in his eyes. "I have my reasons. Are you bidding higher or not?" The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension in the square thick enough to cut. Finally, Mercer stepped back, his hand still resting on his gun. "She better be worth it, stranger. You just made yourself an enemy." "Would not be the first time," Blake replied evenly. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Blake Donovan for $1,000. He brought the gavel down quickly, as if afraid someone might change their mind. Rose felt dizzy with relief and confusion. She had been saved from Mercer, but she knew nothing about this Blake Donovan. He could be just as cruel, just as dangerous. She watched as he counted out the gold coins to the auctioneer and the bank representative, completing the transaction with businesslike efficiency. When the paperwork was signed, the sheriff himself came to untie her wrists, giving Blake a long, measuring look. "You are new in town," the sheriff said. It was not a question. "Just passing through," Blake replied, taking the documents that proved Rose's indenture now belonged to him. "We will be leaving shortly." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Might be wise. Mercer does not forget." Blake walked over to Rose, and she instinctively took a step back. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought, and she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. But there was no cruelty in those blue eyes, no hunger or violence. There was something else there, something she could not quite read. "Miss Navarro," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I give you my word that I will not harm you. Can you ride?" Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. Her wrists were raw from the ropes, and she rubbed them absently. Blake noticed, and his jaw tightened. Without a word, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a clean cloth. He dampened the cloth and held it out to her. "For your wrists. We should tend to those properly when we make camp." She took the cloth hesitantly, watching him for any sign of the cruelty she had expected. But he simply turned to his horse and checked the saddle and supplies with practiced movements. Rose dabbed at her raw wrists, the cool water soothing the burning skin. Around them, the crowd was dispersing, people returning to their business but casting curious glances back at the stranger who had just spent a fortune on a woman's indenture. Clayton Mercer had not left. He stood at the edge of the square with 3 of his men, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. Rose felt a shiver of fear run down her spine despite the heat. Blake noticed the direction of her gaze, and his expression hardened. "We need to get moving." "Can you ride astride, or do you need a side saddle?" "I can ride," Rose said quietly. She had grown up on a small ranch before her father lost everything to gambling and drink. Horses were as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "Good." Blake led her to a second horse tied nearby, a strong-looking sorrel mare. "This is Copper. She is gentle but fast when she needs to be. Have you eaten today?" The question surprised Rose. She shook her head. She had been too nervous to eat that morning, knowing what was coming. Blake pulled some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and handed them to her. "Eat while we ride. I want to put some distance between us and this town before nightfall." Rose took the food gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She mounted Copper with the ease of long practice, settling into the saddle and gathering the reins. Blake swung up onto his bay with fluid grace, and without another word, they started riding out of Tombstone. As they passed through the dusty streets, Rose caught glimpses of people watching from windows and doorways. The whole town would be talking about this for weeks. She should feel ashamed, she supposed, but mostly she just felt numb. Everything had happened so fast. 3 weeks ago, she had been grieving her father. Now she was indentured to a complete stranger, riding away from the only home she had ever known. They rode north at a steady pace, not too fast but purposeful. Blake kept glancing back over his shoulder, clearly watching for pursuit. The desert landscape stretched out around them, endless and harsh under the afternoon sun. Rose chewed the jerky slowly, letting it soften in her mouth. It was good quality, better than anything she had tasted in months. After about an hour of riding in silence, Blake finally spoke. "I know you must have questions." Rose did have questions, hundreds of them, but she did not know where to start. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "Why did you bid on me? You do not know me." Blake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I know Clayton Mercer," he said finally, his voice hard. "I know what kind of man he is. I could not stand by and let you go to him." "You know him. From where?" "That is a long story." Blake shifted in his saddle, and Rose noticed the way his hand unconsciously touched a scar on his neck, barely visible above his collar. "Let us just say our paths crossed before, and I have good reason to hate the man." Rose studied his profile, trying to understand this stranger who had just paid $1,000 for her indenture. $1,000 is a lot of money. You could have just bid slightly higher than him. Mercer is rich and stubborn. If I had bid 600, he would have gone to 7. If I went to 7, he would have kept going until he won or I was bankrupt. The only way to beat him was to bid so high that he would have to think twice. Even Mercer will not spend more than $1,000 just for spite. So you risked everything you had. Not everything. Blake's lips quirked in something that was almost a smile. But a significant amount, yes. "Why?" Rose pressed. "If you hate Mercer, why not just shoot him and be done with it? Why save a stranger?" Blake turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Because I have seen what he does to the people he owns. I have seen the graves. I have heard the stories. And I will not let another innocent person suffer at his hands if I can prevent it. As for shooting him, that would make me a murderer, and he has enough friends in this territory that I would hang before sunset. Someday he will face justice, but not from me, and not today." They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Rose's mind was spinning with everything that had happened. She still did not fully understand Blake's motivations, but she believed he was telling the truth about not wanting to harm her. There was something genuine in the way he spoke, something that suggested deep personal experience with Mercer's cruelty. As the light began to fade, Blake led them off the main trail toward a cluster of rocks that would provide shelter and concealment. "We will camp here for the night," he said, dismounting. "There is a spring just beyond those rocks, so the horses can drink." Rose dismounted as well, her legs stiff from the long ride. She helped Blake tend to the horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down with handfuls of dry grass. Blake worked efficiently, clearly someone who had spent many nights camping under the stars. He had the easy competence of a man comfortable in the wild. Once the horses were cared for and hobbled near the spring, Blake began gathering wood for a fire. Rose watched him, still unsure of her place in this strange new reality. She was legally his property for the next 7 years, bound to obey him and work for him. But he had not given her any orders, had not even told her what he expected from her. "I can cook," she offered as he arranged the kindling, "if you have supplies." Blake looked up at her and nodded. "I have some beans, coffee, and salt pork. There is a pot and pan in that pack. Rose found the supplies and set about preparing a simple meal while Blake got the fire going. It felt strange, this domestic normalcy after such a bizarre day. But the familiar tasks soothed her nerves. She had always found comfort in cooking, in the simple alchemy of turning raw ingredients into something nourishing. As the beans simmered over the fire and the coffee brewed, Blake cleaned and checked his weapons with methodical care. He had a rifle, a shotgun, and 2 pistols, all well maintained and obviously used. Rose watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the scars on his hands and the way he moved with contained strength. "You are a gunfighter," she said. It was not a question. Blake looked up from cleaning his Colt. "I have been called worse things. But no, that is not how I make my living. I am a drover. I move cattle from Texas to the railheads in Kansas and points north. The guns are necessary in that line of work, but I do not hire them out." "Then what are you doing in Tombstone? There are no cattle drives starting here in August." "I was delivering a message to someone in Tucson. Tombstone was on my way back to meet my crew in New Mexico." He holstered the clean pistol and started on the second one. "I had planned to pass through quickly, maybe stay one night. Then I saw the notice about the auction and heard people talking about you being sold to pay your father's debts." "You heard about me before you saw me," Blake nodded. "I was in the saloon last night. Men talk when they drink." They were talking about the auction today, about how Mercer had been bragging that he was going to buy you. The way they talked about it, about what he planned to do with you, it made my blood run cold. Rose's stomach turned. She did not want to know what Mercer had been saying. She stirred the beans, focusing on the simple task to push away the dark thoughts. "Well, thank you for saving me from that." "You do not need to thank me," Blake said quietly. "No one should be sold like livestock. It is wrong." They ate in companionable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, bright and countless in the clear desert sky. The food was simple but good, and Rose felt her strength returning with each bite. Blake ate quickly, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings even as they sat by the fire. "Do you think Mercer will follow us?" Rose asked. "Possibly. Probably not tonight, but he might send men after us. That is why we will keep moving tomorrow, put as much distance as we can between us and Tombstone." "Where are we going?" Blake poured them both coffee from the pot, the dark liquid steaming in the cool night air. "I need to meet up with my crew near Santa Fe. It is about 3 weeks of riding from here, maybe less if we push hard. Once we get there, you will be safe. My boss, Samuel Westfield, is a good man. He owns one of the largest ranches in New Mexico, and Mercer has no power there." "And then what?" Rose asked, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "What will you do with me? What do you expect from me?" Blake met her eyes across the fire. "I expect nothing that you are not willing to give. You are indentured to me legally, yes, but I will not treat you as property. When we reach Santa Fe, I will set you up with a job on the ranch if you want it. You will be paid fairly, treated well, and free to leave whenever you choose. Consider the indenture papers just a formality to get you away from Mercer." Rose stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but his blue eyes were steady and clear. "Why would you do that? You just spent $1,000. Because it was the right thing to do." Blake shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I have been fortunate in my life, more than most. I have a good job, good friends, my health and strength. Using those blessings to help someone in need does not seem like much of a sacrifice. Most men would not see it that way. Most men are fools." Blake smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look years younger. Present company excluded, of course. Rose found herself smiling back, the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. Of course. They finished their coffee and Blake banked the fire, leaving just enough coals to rekindle it in the morning. He spread out his bedroll on one side of the fire and handed Rose a second bedroll and blanket. "You should get some rest. We will be starting early tomorrow." Rose took the bedding and laid it out on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance. She lay down, pulling the blanket over herself, and stared up at the vast expanse of stars above. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, but beneath the confusion and fear, there was a tiny spark of something else. Hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of hope. "Blake," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything." There was a pause, and then his deep voice replied, gentle in the night. "Sleep well, Rose. You are safe now." And somehow, despite everything, she believed him. Rose closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her down into sleep, the first peaceful rest she had known in weeks. The next morning, they were on the trail before dawn, riding steadily northeast. Blake set a strong pace but stopped frequently to rest the horses and let them drink. He was clearly an experienced traveler, always aware of their surroundings, always planning ahead to the next water source or shelter. As the days passed, Rose began to relax around him. Blake was unfailingly courteous, always making sure she had enough to eat, that she was comfortable, that her horse was sound. He never invaded her space or made inappropriate comments. In fact, he barely spoke unless necessary, seeming content with silence. But Rose found she wanted to know more about this enigmatic man who had saved her. On the third day of their journey, as they rested the horses in the shade of a rocky outcropping, she asked him about his past. "You said you are a drover. Have you always done that?" Blake took a long drink from his canteen before answering. "No. I grew up in Missouri on a small farm. When the war came, I was too young to fight. By the time it ended, my parents had both died from illness. The farm was gone, taken for taxes. I was 15 and alone. I drifted west, taking whatever work I could find. Eventually, I ended up working for Samuel Westfield, moving cattle. That was 8 years ago. He taught me the trade, and I have been with him ever since." "Do you like it?" "The driving, I do. It is hard work, dangerous sometimes, but there is freedom in it. Every drive is different. You see new places, meet new people. And there is something satisfying about delivering a herd successfully, knowing you have done your job well." Rose nodded, understanding that feeling. She had felt it herself when she successfully harvested a good crop from her small garden or finished a difficult piece of sewing. Pride in work well done was universal. "What about you?" Blake asked, surprising her. He rarely initiated conversation. "What did you do before your father died?" Rose felt the familiar ache in her chest at the mention of her father. "We had a small place outside Tombstone. Not much, but it was ours. I kept a garden, raised chickens, did sewing and mending for people in town. My father worked odd jobs when he could get them. It was a hard life, but we managed." She paused, deciding how much to share. "My mother died when I was 12, cholera. After that, my father was never quite the same. He drank too much, gambled what little we had. I tried to hold things together, but the debts just kept piling up." "You should not have been made to pay for his mistakes," Blake said firmly. "It was not your debt. The law saw it differently. The law is wrong." Blake stood and walked over to check on the horses, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. "Selling people to pay debts is slavery by another name. I do not care what they call it." Rose followed him, intrigued by his vehemence. "You feel strongly about this." "I do." Blake ran his hand along his horse's neck, not looking at her. "I have seen too much suffering caused by men who believe they have the right to own other people. It is wrong, whether it is legal or not." There was clearly more to that story, but Rose did not push. Everyone had their secrets, their painful memories. She had only known Blake for 3 days, after all. There would be time to learn more if he chose to share. They remounted and continued riding, the landscape gradually changing as they moved north. The harsh desert began to give way to grasslands and low hills. They saw more wildlife now. Antelope grazing in the distance, hawks circling overhead, even a small herd of wild horses that thundered away as they approached. On the 5th day, they reached a small settlement, barely worthy of being called a town. It consisted of a trading post, a blacksmith, and a few scattered houses. Blake decided to stop there to replenish supplies and get news of the trail ahead. The trading post was run by an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He looked them over carefully as they entered, his gaze lingering on Rose in a way that made Blake step slightly closer to her. "Help you folks?" the old man asked. "Need supplies," Blake said. "Coffee, beans, salt pork, flour if you have it. Also looking for information about the trail to Santa Fe." "Got all that." The trader began gathering items from his shelves. "Trail is clear, but there have been reports of bandits about 50 miles north of here. You might want to take the eastern route through the mountains instead." "How many bandits?" Reports vary. Some say 6, some say 10. "They have been hitting travelers and small wagon trains. Nothing big but dangerous enough." Blake nodded thoughtfully, paying for the supplies. As they were leaving, the trader said, "You two married?" Blake did not hesitate. "Yes." "Might want to make it more obvious. Young woman traveling alone with a man, people talk. Could cause trouble for you." "Noted," Blake said curtly, guiding Rose out of the trading post. Once they were outside, Rose said, "Why did you tell him we were married?" "Because it is simpler than explaining the truth, and it will help protect your reputation. If anyone asks, we are married. I am Blake Donovan, you are Rose Donovan, and we are heading to my ranch in New Mexico. Can you remember that?" "Yes, but..." "I know it is a lie, but it is a necessary one. People see a young, unmarried woman traveling with a man, they assume the worst. This way, no one questions it." Rose realized he was right. It made sense, even if it felt strange. "All right, Mr. and Mrs. Donovan." Blake's expression softened slightly. "You can still call me Blake. The Mr. Business seems too formal for people who are sleeping under the same stars." They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwood trees near a small creek. The sound of the running water was soothing, and for the first time in days, Rose felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Blake caught a couple of trout from the creek, and they had fresh fish for dinner, a welcome change from beans and salt pork. As they ate, Rose found herself studying Blake's face in the firelight. He was handsome, she realized, though his looks were rugged rather than refined. There was strength in the line of his jaw, intelligence in his eyes, and a fundamental decency in the way he treated her. He never stared at her the way most men did, never made her feel like an object or a possession. Despite legally owning her indenture, he treated her as an equal. "You are staring," Blake said without looking up from his fish. Rose felt her cheeks flush. "Sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange this all is. A week ago, I thought my life was over. Now I am riding across the territory with a stranger who bought my freedom and asks for nothing in return. It does not seem real." Blake looked up then, his blue eyes meeting hers across the fire. "It is real. And you are going to be fine, Rose. Better than fine. You are strong and smart. Once we reach Santa Fe, you will have opportunities. You can build a new life. What if I do not know how? Then you will learn. We all do." Blake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up into the night. "When I was 15 and alone, I did not know how to do anything except farm work. I learned to ride, to rope, to handle cattle, to read trail signs, to survive in the wilderness. You will learn too. And you will not be alone. Samuel's ranch is full of good people who will help you." Rose felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. Not just gratitude, but something more. She was beginning to genuinely like Blake Donovan, to appreciate not just what he had done for her, but who he was as a person. He was kind without being soft, strong without being brutal, confident without being arrogant. In another time, another place, under different circumstances, she thought she could fall for a man like him, but she pushed that thought away. Blake had saved her out of a sense of moral obligation, not because he was interested in her romantically. She was a responsibility to him, a problem to be solved. Once he delivered her safely to Santa Fe, he would go back to his life and she would have to build hers. Getting attached to him would only lead to heartache. They traveled for another week without incident, falling into an easy routine. Blake taught her how to read the landscape, how to find water sources, how to identify animal tracks. Rose proved to be a quick learner, absorbing everything he shared. In turn, she took over most of the cooking, creating surprisingly tasty meals from their limited supplies. Blake complimented her cooking with genuine appreciation, and Rose found herself taking pleasure in the simple act of feeding him well. The weather turned cooler as they gained elevation, moving into the foothills of the mountains. They saw fewer people now, just the occasional prospector or trapper. The isolation should have made Rose nervous, but instead, she felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in her life, she was not constrained by town gossip or social expectations. Out here, it was just her and Blake and the vast wilderness. One evening, as they made camp beside a high mountain stream, Rose asked the question that had been nagging at her for days. "Blake, you said you knew Mercer. What happened between you two?" Blake stiffened, his hand stilling in the act of unsaddling his horse. For a long moment, Rose thought he was not going to answer. Then he sighed heavily and turned to face her. 3 years ago, I was on a cattle drive that passed near Mercer's ranch. We stopped there to water the herd and rest for a night. Mercer seemed friendly enough at first, offered us food and a place to sleep. But that night, I heard someone crying. I followed the sound and found a young woman, not much older than you, locked in a shed behind the house. She was covered in bruises and burns, barely conscious. Rose felt her stomach turn. "What did you do?" I broke the lock and tried to help her. She told me Mercer had bought her indenture 6 months earlier and had been beating her ever since. She begged me to take her away. I was trying to figure out how to get her out of there when Mercer and his men showed up. They caught me with her, accused me of trying to steal his property. Mercer's men held me down while he beat me. He said I needed to learn not to interfere with another man's business. Blake pulled down his collar, showing Rose the scar she had noticed before. It was long and angry, running from his ear to his collarbone. He did this with a branding iron, said it would remind me to mind my own business. Then they threw me out with nothing but my horse. The rest of the crew had to leave without me. What happened to the woman? Blake's face went hard. I do not know. I tried to go back the next day, but Mercer had guards posted. A week later, I heard she had died. Mercer claimed it was an accident, that she fell down the stairs. No one investigated. No one cared. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. That is why you bid on me. You were trying to save her. I was trying to make sure no one else suffered her fate. I should have done more 3 years ago. I should have fought harder, found a way to save her. I carry that failure with me every day. Without thinking, Rose crossed the space between them and touched his arm gently. It was not your fault. You tried. You were outnumbered and alone. What more could you have done? Blake looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his eyes, some emotion Rose could not quite name. I could have killed him. I have thought about it 1,000 times. Going back, shooting him dead, and damn the consequences. Then you would be dead or in prison, and you could not have saved me, Rose said softly. Maybe this was meant to be. Maybe saving me is how you make peace with what happened to her. Blake covered her hand with his palm warm and rough with calluses. Maybe. I hope so. I hope she knows wherever she is that I did not forget, that I tried to make it right. They stood there for a moment, hands joined, something unspoken passing between them. Then Blake gently released her hand and stepped back. We should get dinner started. It is going to be a cold night. Rose nodded, her hand still tingling from his touch. As she prepared the meal, she replayed the conversation in her mind. Blake was not just a good man. He was a man haunted by his inability to save someone. And now he had appointed himself her protector, determined not to fail again. It explained so much about his behavior, his insistence on her safety and comfort, but it also complicated things. Rose realized she was developing feelings for Blake that went beyond gratitude. She admired his integrity, his strength, his quiet kindness. She enjoyed his company, felt safe with him in a way she had never felt with any man. But did he see her as anything more than a second chance at redemption? Was she just a stand-in for the woman he had failed to save? That night, as Rose lay in her bedroll staring at the stars, she heard Blake's voice from across the dying fire. "Rose, are you awake?" "Yes. Thank you for listening, for understanding. I have not talked about that night with anyone." "You can talk to me anytime, Blake, about anything." "I know. That means more than you realize." Rose smiled into the darkness, her heart feeling fuller than it had in a long time. Whatever complicated emotions were developing between them, she knew one thing for certain. Blake Donovan was a good man, perhaps the best she had ever known. And if all she could ever have from him was friendship and protection, that would still be infinitely more than she had expected a few weeks ago. The next several days brought them deeper into the mountains. The trail grew steeper and more difficult, requiring careful navigation. Blake was constantly alert for signs of the bandits the trader had warned them about, but they saw no one. The solitude was complete, broken only by the call of birds and the rustle of wind through pine trees. On the 14th day of their journey, they crested a ridge and saw a small valley spread out below them. A thin column of smoke rose from what looked like a cabin nestled among the trees. Blake reined in his horse, studying the scene carefully. "What do you think?" Rose asked. "Someone lives down there. Could be friendly, could be the bandits we were warned about, but we are low on supplies and the horses could use a rest. I think we should approach carefully, be ready to leave quickly if needed." They made their way down into the valley, Blake's hand resting on his pistol the whole time. As they got closer, they could see the cabin more clearly. It was well maintained, with a small corral holding a few horses and a vegetable garden out front. Chickens scratched in the yard. Before they reached the cabin, the door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her 40s, with gray streaked brown hair pulled back in a bun and a rifle in her hands. She did not point it at them, but she held it ready. "That is far enough," she called. "State your business." Blake pulled his horse to a stop and held his hands away from his weapons. "We mean no harm, madam. We are traveling to Santa Fe and saw your smoke. We were hoping to trade for supplies and maybe rest our horses for a bit. We can pay." The woman studied them carefully, her eyes moving from Blake to Rose and back. Finally, she lowered the rifle slightly. "You running from something?" "Not from the law," Blake said carefully, "but we would prefer not to advertise our route. Domestic trouble." Blake glanced at Rose, then back to the woman. "You could say that." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I see. Well, you look harmless enough, and God knows I could use some company and cash. Come on up to the house, but keep your hands where I can see them." They dismounted and approached the cabin. Up close, the woman looked tired but strong, with the weathered skin of someone who spent her life outdoors. She kept the rifle with her but seemed less tense now. "Name is Martha Colburn," she said. "This is my place. My husband died 2 years back, and I have been running it alone since." "Blake and Rose Donovan," Blake said, maintaining the fiction of their marriage. "We appreciate your hospitality." Martha led them inside, where the cabin proved to be clean and comfortable. There was a stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and 2 rocking chairs. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a pleasant scent. "I have coffee, fresh eggs, some vegetables from the garden," Martha said. "I will trade you for ammunition if you have any to spare. I am running low." Blake nodded. "I can do that. I have extra rifle cartridges." While Blake and Martha negotiated the trade, Rose looked around the cabin with interest. There were signs everywhere of a life built with care. Quilts on the beds, curtains at the windows, books on a shelf. It was a home, not just a shelter. Martha followed her gaze and smiled. "You like it? I have put a lot of work into this place. My Sam and I built it together, board by board. I was not going to let it go to ruin just because he is gone." "It is beautiful," Rose said sincerely. "You have done an amazing job." "Thank you, dear." Martha moved to the stove and began preparing food. "So how long have you two been married?" Rose and Blake exchanged a quick glance. "Not long," Blake said carefully. "A few weeks. Newlyweds then. That explains the nervousness." Martha smiled knowingly. "Though you do not act much like newlyweds, if you do not mind me saying. You barely touch each other, barely even look at each other. If I did not know better, I would say you just met." Rose felt her face heat. Martha was far too observant. Blake, however, remained calm. "We are still getting to know each other," he said. "It was a quick marriage." "Ah," Martha nodded sagely. "One of those. Well, none of my business either way. You both seem like good people, and that is what matters." They stayed for several hours, resting and enjoying Martha's generous hospitality. The older woman was a fountain of information about the trail ahead, marking a map for Blake and warning him about difficult sections. She also shared news from the area, including confirmation that bandits had been active in the region. "They hit a supply wagon just last week," Martha said. "Killed the driver, took everything. The law has not caught them yet. You two be careful out there." As the afternoon waned, Blake decided they should push on, wanting to cover more ground before dark. Martha packed them extra food for the journey and pressed a small jar of honey into Rose's hands. "For sweetening your coffee on cold mornings," she said with a warm smile. Then more quietly she added, "Whatever trouble you are running from, I hope you find peace on the other end. You both deserve it." Rose impulsively hugged the older woman, surprising them both. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." "Take care of each other," Martha said, looking between them. "Life is too short and too hard to face alone." As they rode away from the cabin, Rose felt a pang of sadness. Martha had reminded her of what she had lost when her mother died, that sense of feminine wisdom and warmth, someone to confide in and learn from. But there was also something hopeful in the encounter. Martha had survived her husband's death and built a life alone. If she could do it, maybe Rose could too. "She was nice," Rose said as they climbed back up the ridge. "She was," Blake agreed. "Brave too. Not many women could run a place like that alone in country like this." "You think she believed we were married?" Blake snorted softly. "Not for a second, but she did not press the issue, and I am grateful for that. Blake, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When we get to Santa Fe, when I am set up on the ranch and you go back to your life, will I ever see you again?" Blake was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he said finally. "I am on the trail a lot, moving cattle, Sometimes I am gone for months at a time. But I will be based out of the ranch, so yes, you would see me between drives. Good. Rose was surprised by how much relief she felt at that answer. The thought of Blake simply disappearing from her life after everything they had shared felt wrong somehow. They made camp that night on a high plateau with clear views in all directions, a defensive position in case the bandits tried to approach. Blake built only a small fire, keeping it low to avoid drawing attention. They ate Martha's food gratefully, the fresh vegetables a welcome treat after so many days of preserved rations. "We are about 5 days from Santa Fe now," Blake said, studying the map by firelight. "If we can maintain this pace and avoid trouble, we should arrive on Saturday." "What is Santa Fe like?" "Bigger than Tombstone, more cosmopolitan. It has been a major trading center for decades. There are Anglo settlers, Spanish families who have been there for generations, Puebloan people, traders from Mexico. It is a mixing pot." "Will I fit in there?" Blake looked up from the map, his eyes serious. "You will fit in anywhere you choose, Rose. You are adaptable, intelligent, hardworking. Any community would be lucky to have you." Rose felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You have a lot of faith in me. I have seen what you are capable of these past 2 weeks. You have handled everything that has been thrown at you with grace and strength. Never doubt yourself." They settled in for the night, but Rose found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to Martha's words about taking care of each other, about life being too short to face alone. She thought about Blake's story of the woman he had failed to save, about his determination to protect Rose. She thought about the easy companionship that had developed between them, the way she felt safe and valued in his presence. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere between Tombstone and this mountain plateau, between the auction and 1,000 small kindnesses, she had fallen completely and hopelessly in love with Blake Donovan. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The next morning dawned clear and cold. They broke camp quickly and were on the trail by first light. Blake seemed preoccupied, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. Rose noticed he kept his rifle across his saddle rather than secured in its scabbard. Around midday they heard it, gunshots in the distance, followed by shouting. Blake immediately reined in, holding up a hand for Rose to stop. They were on a ridge overlooking a shallow valley, and below them they could see a wagon surrounded by mounted men. Even from this distance, it was clear what was happening. The bandits had found victims. "We need to go around," Blake said quietly. "Stay quiet and follow me." But before they could move, one of the bandits spotted them. He shouted and pointed, and suddenly several of the men were riding toward them. "Rose, ride," Blake yelled, wheeling his horse around. They took off at a gallop, the bandits pursuing. Blake led them into the trees, following a game trail that wound up the mountainside. The bandits were gaining, their horses fresher than Blake and Rose's tired mounts. Blake fired several shots over his shoulder, not really aiming, just trying to slow them down. They burst out of the trees onto a rocky slope, and Blake made a split-second decision. He led them into a narrow canyon, high walls rising on either side. It was a gamble. If the canyon was a dead end, they would be trapped. But if it led through, they might lose their pursuers in the maze of passages. Luck was with them. The canyon twisted and turned but remained passable. They pushed the horses hard, rocks clattering under their hooves. Behind them, the bandits' shouts echoed off the stone walls. Finally, the canyon opened out into another valley, this one with several possible escape routes. Blake chose the widest trail and they flew down it, the horses lathered with sweat and breathing hard. They rode for another hour before Blake finally slowed, listening carefully for sounds of pursuit. "I think we lost them," he said, his own breathing labored. "But we need to keep moving. They might pick up our trail again." They continued at a steady pace until nightfall, when Blake finally deemed it safe enough to stop. But he did not build a fire, not wanting to risk the light giving away their position. They ate a cold meal and sat in the darkness, listening to every sound. "That was too close," Rose said quietly. "Yes." Blake checked his weapons again, ensuring they were loaded and ready. "We were lucky. If they had caught us in the open, it would have been bad. You saved us. Your quick thinking with the canyon. Pure luck. It could have been a dead end." Blake rubbed his face tiredly. "We need to be more careful. No more stopping during the day, no fires until we are certain we are not being followed." They took turns sleeping that night, one always awake and on watch. When it was Rose's turn to keep watch, she sat with Blake's rifle across her lap, staring out into the darkness and thinking about how quickly things could go wrong. They had been lucky today, but luck could run out. When dawn came, Blake wanted to start riding immediately, but his horse was limping. Blake examined the animal carefully and found a stone bruise on its hoof. It was not serious, but the horse needed rest. "We cannot stay here," Rose said, noting how exposed their position was. "I know. You will have to ride ahead on Copper. I will follow on foot, leading my horse. We can trade off later when he is sound again. I am not leaving you behind. Rose, be reasonable. If those bandits catch up to us and I am on foot, I cannot run, but if you are ahead, you can get to safety." "No." Rose's voice was firm. "We stay together. I will walk and lead Copper. You can ride her." "That does not make sense. If they come, you will be helpless. And so would you be if you are on foot. At least this way we are both mobile if we need to run." Rose dismounted and began gathering their gear. "I am not leaving you, Blake, so stop arguing and get on the horse." Blake stared at her for a long moment, something fierce and tender in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. But if I say run, you run. Do not look back, do not wait for me. Just ride for Santa Fe as fast as you can." "Promise me." "I promise." Rose held his gaze, knowing she was lying. If it came to that, she would not leave him. She could not. They traveled slowly, Blake riding Copper while Rose walked and led his limping bay. It was hard going, and Rose's feet began to ache in her boots. But she did not complain. Blake kept offering to trade places, but she refused. His horse was bigger, heavier. He was better equipped to defend them if they were attacked. Around noon, they reached a small stream and stopped to rest and water the horses. Blake examined his bay's hoof again and declared it much improved. He should be able to carry weight again by evening. They were refilling their canteens when they heard horses approaching. Blake grabbed his rifle and moved to a defensive position behind some rocks, pulling Rose with him. They waited, tense, as the sound grew louder. 3 riders came into view, but these were not bandits. They wore the dust-covered clothes of cowboys, and the lead rider had a badge pinned to his vest. A lawman. Blake stood slowly, keeping his rifle pointed at the ground but ready. "Can we help you, officer?" The lawman reined in, his eyes taking in Blake's defensive posture and Rose's frightened face. "Relax, friend. We are not here to cause trouble. I am Deputy Marshal James Porter out of Santa Fe. These are my deputies. We are tracking a gang of bandits that have been terrorizing this area. Have you seen anyone?" Blake relaxed slightly. "Yesterday, about 20 miles south. They were attacking a wagon. We did not stick around to see how it ended. They chased us for a while, but we lost them in the canyons." Porter nodded grimly. "That would be the Jefferson wagon. We found it this morning. The driver was killed, the wagon looted. We have been after this gang for 2 weeks. Which way did you lose them?" Blake described their route, and Porter marked it on his map. "Good. We will head that way. You two should keep moving towards Santa Fe. It is only about 3 days from here and you will be safe once you reach town. Thank you, Marshal. We appreciate it. As the lawman prepared to leave, Porter paused and looked at Rose. Madam, are you all right? You look frightened. Is this man bothering you? Rose shook her head quickly. No, sir. This is my husband. We are just shaken from the encounter with the bandits. Porter studied Blake for a moment longer, then nodded. All right, you folks be careful out there. He tipped his hat and rode off with his deputies, heading south toward the bandits' last known location. Once they were alone again, Blake let out a long breath. That could have gone badly. If he had decided to detain us and ask more questions, he might have discovered the truth about your indenture. Would that be so terrible? The indenture is legal. Legal, yes. But it might have raised questions about why we were traveling alone, where we were headed, whether you were truly safe with me. Some lawmen take a dim view of the indenture system. They might have insisted on taking you to Santa Fe separately, or held us for questioning. It is better that he accepted our story at face value. They continued their journey, feeling somewhat safer knowing that lawmen were actively hunting the bandits. Blake's horse recovered well, and by evening both of them were riding again. They made good progress over the next 2 days, the terrain gradually leveling out as they descended from the mountains. On the morning of the 18th day since leaving Tombstone, they crested a final rise and saw Santa Fe spread out in the valley below. The town was much larger than Tombstone, with adobe buildings glowing golden in the morning sun. Rose could see church spires, a central plaza, and countless houses and businesses spreading out in all directions. There it is, Blake said softly. Your new home if you want it to be. Rose stared at the town, feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was it, the end of their journey together. Soon Blake would deliver her to his employer, set her up with a job, and then he would leave for his next cattle drive. The thought made her chest ache. It is beautiful, she said, because she had to say something. They rode down into Santa Fe, attracting curious glances from locals. Blake navigated the streets with confidence, clearly familiar with the town. He led them through the bustling plaza, past market stalls and shop fronts, until they reached a large stable on the edge of town. A young man came out to greet them, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Blake. Blake, we did not expect you for another week. Where is the rest of the crew? Hello, Tommy. They are waiting near Albuquerque. I had some business to attend to first. Blake dismounted and helped Rose down from her horse. This is Rose Navarro. Rose, this is Tommy Brennan. He works for Samuel Westfield. Tommy tipped his hat to Rose, his friendly brown eyes full of curiosity. Pleasure, miss. Any friend of Blake's is welcome here. Does Mr. Westfield know you are coming? Not yet. Is he in town? At the ranch, last I heard. It is about an hour's ride north. Blake nodded, then turned to Rose. We will rest here for a bit, clean up, and then ride out to the ranch. Samuel will want to meet you and discuss your situation. They spent the next few hours at the stable. Blake arranged for their horses to be fed and rested, and he and Rose both took the opportunity to wash up and change into cleaner clothes. Rose had only the clothes she had been wearing when she was auctioned, but they had been cleaned in streams along the way. She did her best to make herself presentable, braiding her long dark hair and brushing dust from her skirt. When she emerged from the small washroom, Blake was waiting. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, and Rose was struck again by how handsome he was. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You look nice, Blake said finally, his voice a bit rough. Thank you, so do you. They stood there awkwardly, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Then Blake cleared his throat and gestured toward the horses. We should go. It will be evening soon. The ride to the Westfield Ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. It was beautiful country, green and fertile. As they approached the ranch house, Rose could see it was a substantial operation. There were multiple barns, corrals filled with horses, and at least a dozen outbuildings. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a wide veranda and a red tile roof. Several ranch hands stopped work to watch as Blake and Rose rode up. A tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence came out of the house, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Blake. "Blake Donovan, I heard you had arrived in Santa Fe. Tommy sent word." The man strode forward and clasped Blake's hand warmly. "It is good to see you, son." "Good to see you too, Samuel. I need to talk to you about something important." Samuel's eyes shifted to Rose and his expression grew more serious. "I see. Well, come inside, both of you. We will talk over coffee." They followed Samuel into the house, which was comfortably furnished with heavy wooden furniture and colorful woven rugs. A Mexican woman came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maria, could you bring coffee and some of those cookies you made this morning?" Samuel asked. Then to Blake and Rose, "Please sit." They settled into chairs in Samuel's study, a spacious room lined with books and maps. Samuel sat behind his desk, studying them with keen gray eyes that missed nothing. "So," he said, "tell me what is going on." Blake explained everything: the auction in Tombstone, Mercer's cruelty, the decision to outbid him, the journey to Santa Fe. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When Blake finished, Samuel leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Clayton Mercer, I have heard of him. Bad business all around. You did the right thing, Blake, though it cost you dearly." "I could not let her go to him," Blake said simply. Samuel nodded, then turned his attention to Rose. "Miss Navarro, Blake tells me you are a hard worker, good with gardens and sewing and such. Would you be interested in working here on the ranch? I can offer you a position as a housekeeper. Maria could use the help, and you would have your own room, good wages, and fair treatment. What do you say?" Rose felt overwhelmed by the kindness in Samuel's face. "I would be grateful for the work, sir. Thank you." "Good. Then it is settled. Maria will show you to your room and help you get settled." Samuel stood and extended his hand to Rose. "Welcome to the Westfield Ranch, Miss Navarro. I hope you will be happy here." Rose shook his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Westfield, for everything." Maria appeared to take Rose to her room, and Rose followed, casting one last glance back at Blake. He was watching her go, something unreadable in his expression. Her room was small but clean and comfortable, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the corrals. Maria was warm and welcoming, showing Rose where everything was and promising to help her get supplies for clothes and personal items. "You will like it here," Maria said with a kind smile. "Mr. Westfield is a good man, and Blake is like a son to him. If Blake brought you here, then you must be special." After Maria left, Rose sat on the bed and let the tears finally come. They were not tears of sadness exactly, but of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. She had made it. She was safe. She had a job, a room, a new start. But as the tears slowed, she realized what was missing. Blake. Where was he? Had he already left to rejoin his crew? Had he said goodbye without even seeing her? Rose wiped her eyes and went to find out. She found Samuel in his study, alone this time. "Mr. Westfield, where is Blake?" Samuel looked up from the papers on his desk. "He rode out about an hour ago. He needs to meet up with the crew and start the drive back from Albuquerque. They have a contract to fulfill in Kansas, and they are already behind schedule because of the detour to help you." Rose felt her heart sink. "He left, without saying goodbye," Samuel's expression softened. "He said to tell you that you are in good hands here, and that he hopes you will be happy." "Blake is not good with goodbyes, Miss Navarro. Saying them hurts him too much." Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. She excused herself and returned to her room, where she finally let herself acknowledge the depth of her feelings. She loved Blake Donovan, and he was gone. He had saved her, protected her, treated her with kindness and respect, and then he had simply ridden away. Did he feel nothing for her? Had she been just a responsibility, a problem solved? Or had saying goodbye been too hard for him too? Rose did not have answers. All she knew was that her heart was breaking, and the man she loved was riding away from her without a backward glance. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and routine. Rose threw herself into her duties, learning the rhythms of the ranch and becoming a valued member of the household. Maria taught her new cooking techniques, and Rose in turn helped with the endless cleaning and mending required to keep the large household running. She also started a kitchen garden, coaxing vegetables from the rich soil. Samuel was kind and grandfatherly, checking on her regularly to make sure she was settling in well. The ranch hands were respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her and never making her feel uncomfortable. It was everything Blake had promised: a safe place, fair treatment, good wages. But Rose was not happy. Every day she thought about Blake, wondering where he was, whether he was safe, whether he ever thought about her. She told herself to forget him, to move on, to be grateful for what she had. But her heart would not listen. 6 weeks after Blake had left, Maria found Rose crying in the garden. "Oh, Mija," Maria said gently, sitting beside her. "You miss him, do not you?" Rose nodded, unable to speak. "He misses you too, I think. I saw the way he looked at you before he left, like a man torn in two." "Then why did he leave without saying goodbye?" Rose asked, her voice breaking. Maria sighed. "Men are foolish creatures sometimes. They think they are being strong by hiding their feelings. Blake, he has been alone for so long. I think he does not know how to let himself love someone. He is afraid. Afraid of what? Of losing someone he cares about, of not being enough, of all the things that terrify people when they start to care deeply." Maria patted Rose's hand. "Give him time. He will come back, and when he does, you can tell him how you feel." "What if he does not come back?" "He will. Samuel told me the crew is due back in about a month. Blake always comes back." Rose clung to that hope through the following weeks. She worked hard, made friends with the other staff, and slowly began to build a life. But always in the back of her mind, she was counting the days until Blake might return. Finally, on a crisp October morning, Tommy came running up from the stable. "They are back. Blake and the crew are coming up the road." Rose's heart leaped into her throat. She wanted to run to meet them, but pride held her back. What if Blake had forgotten her? What if he showed no interest? She could not bear the humiliation. Instead, she watched from the kitchen window as the crew rode in, dusty and tired but in good spirits. Blake was at the head of the group, and even from a distance, Rose could see he looked thinner, more worn. But he was smiling at something one of the other men said, and the sight of his face made her chest ache. The men dismounted and began tending to their horses. Samuel came out to greet them, shaking hands and welcoming them home. Rose stayed in the kitchen, her hands busy with preparing lunch but her eyes constantly drawn to the window. Blake spoke with Samuel for a few minutes, then his head turned toward the house. Even from this distance, Rose could feel the intensity of his gaze. He said something to Samuel, who nodded, and then Blake was walking toward the house with long, purposeful strides. Rose's hands trembled as she set down the knife she had been using. Maria gave her an encouraging smile. "Go on. He is coming to see you." Rose stepped out onto the back porch just as Blake rounded the corner. They stopped, staring at each other across the small distance. Blake looked different somehow, older maybe, or just more serious. His blue eyes were intense, searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. "Hello, Rose," he said quietly. "Hello, Blake." Rose's voice was steady despite the thundering of her heart. "How was your drive? Long, difficult, profitable?" He took a step closer. "But I thought about you every day." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "You did. Every single day. I tried to forget you, tried to convince myself that delivering you here was enough, that I had done my duty and could move on." Blake took another step closer, and now they were almost within touching distance. "But I could not. You are in my head, in my heart. I cannot get you out, and I do not want to any more. Blake." Rose breathed his name like a prayer. "I love you, Rose. I think I started falling for you that first day on the trail, and every day since has only made it stronger. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I am just a cowboy with no real home, gone for months at a time. You deserve better than that, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that you are not alone in your feelings, if you have feelings, if I am not being a fool for hoping." Rose crossed the distance between them and kissed him. It was the first kiss for both of them, clumsy and desperate and absolutely perfect. Blake's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Rose felt like she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I will take that as a yes." Rose laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, I love you too. I have loved you for so long, Blake. I thought I would die when you left without saying goodbye. I am sorry. I was a coward. I could not face saying goodbye, knowing I might never have the courage to tell you how I felt." Blake cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. "But I am here now, and if you will have me, I am not going anywhere without you ever again." "What are you saying?" "I am saying, marry me. For real this time. Be my wife, Rose. I know it will not be easy. I will still have to go on drives, though maybe not as often. Samuel has offered me a position managing the ranch, which would keep me closer to home. We can build a house here on the ranch property. We can build a life together. If you want that, if you want me." "I want you," Rose said fiercely. "I want all of that. Yes, Blake. Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, sweeter. Around them, the ranch continued its daily rhythms, but in that moment they were the only two people in the world. Maria appeared on the porch, a huge smile on her face. "I told you he would come back. Congratulations to you both." Samuel joined them a moment later, clapping Blake on the shoulder. "About time you figured it out, son. I was starting to worry you would let her get away." "Never," Blake said, his arm tight around Rose's waist. "I am never letting her go." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in Santa Fe, with Samuel giving Rose away and Maria standing up as her witness. The crew all attended, cheering and offering toasts at the celebration afterward. It was simple and joyful, exactly what both of them wanted. Samuel kept his word about the management position, and Blake took on more responsibility for running the ranch operations. This meant he spent more time at home, though he still occasionally led cattle drives when they were short-handed or the destination was particularly important. But he was never gone for more than a few weeks at a time, and he always came back to Rose. They built a small house on the ranch property, just big enough for two. Rose planted a large garden and kept chickens, finding joy in creating a home. Blake proved to be a devoted husband, attentive and loving, always making sure Rose knew how much she meant to him. News eventually reached them that Clayton Mercer had been arrested for murder after another of his servants died under suspicious circumstances. This time there was an investigation, and evidence of his cruelty was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to hang. When Blake heard the news, He held Rose close and said a prayer for all the people Mercer had hurt over the years, especially the young woman he had failed to save. "She can rest now," Rose whispered, "and so can you." Blake nodded against her hair. "I like to think she sent you to me, that somehow saving you was how I honored her memory." "Then we will both honor her," Rose said. "By living well, by being happy, by never taking for granted the life we have together." The years passed peacefully. Blake continued to excel as ranch manager, earning Samuel's complete trust and respect. Rose became known throughout the area for her beautiful garden and her skill with healing herbs, often helping sick neighbors with remedies Maria had taught her. They were respected members of the community, known for their generosity and kindness. 3 years after their wedding, Rose gave birth to a daughter with her dark hair and Blake's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, and she was the light of their lives. 2 years later, a son arrived, strong and healthy, whom they named Michael after Blake's father. Blake proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children about horses and cattle and the land while Rose taught them to read and garden and appreciate the beauty in the world. When Samuel grew too old to manage the ranch himself, he officially made Blake his partner and eventually left him the entire operation in his will. Blake was deeply moved by this gesture, knowing Samuel had no children of his own and had chosen to pass his legacy to Blake. "You are like the son I never had," Samuel told him near the end. "And Rose is the daughter of my heart. Take care of this place, Blake. It is yours now. Make it everything it can be." Blake promised, and he kept that promise. Under his management, the Westfield Ranch, which they renamed the Donovan Ranch after Samuel's death, became one of the most successful operations in New Mexico. But success never changed Blake. He remained humble and hardworking, always treating his employees fairly and remembering what it felt like to be young and alone with nothing. Rose thrived as well. She became involved in charitable work in Santa Fe, helping other women who found themselves in difficult circumstances. She never forgot how close she had come to a life of misery under Clayton Mercer's ownership, and she was determined to help others escape similar fates. She and Blake opened their home to those in need, offering employment and second chances to anyone willing to work hard. 20 years after that fateful auction in Tombstone, Blake and Rose sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their children were grown now. Sarah married to a good man who ran the ranch's horse breeding program, and Michael working alongside his father to manage the cattle operations. There were grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter filling the evening air. "You ever think about that day?" Rose asked, her hand in Blake's. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Blake admitted. "I think about how close we came to never having this. If I had arrived in Tombstone a day later, if I had not heard the men talking in the saloon, if I had not had enough money with me. But you did. You were there exactly when you needed to be. Do you ever regret it, the life we have built? I know you did not choose it freely. If I had not bought your indenture, you might have gone on to something completely different." Rose turned to look at her husband, seeing the silver threads now mixed with the brown in his hair, the deeper lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But those blue eyes were still as intense and kind as they had been that first day. "Blake Donovan, I have never regretted a single day with you. You gave me my life back. You gave me love and respect and a home. You gave me everything I never dared to dream of. I would choose this life, choose you, 1,000 times over." Blake lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "I love you, Rose. I loved you then, I love you now, I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Rose replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My hero, my husband, my heart." They sat together as the stars began to appear, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had saved them both. It had started with a desperate bid at an auction, but it had become something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and love. In the distance, Rose could hear Sarah calling the children in for dinner, Michael's deep laugh as he joked with the ranch hands finishing their day's work. This was their legacy, not just the land and cattle, but the family and community they had nurtured, the values they had instilled, the love they had spread. Blake squeezed her hand gently. "Come on, Mrs. Donovan. Let us go have dinner with our family." Rose smiled and stood, her hand firmly clasped in his. "Lead the way, Mr. Donovan." Together, they walked into their home, into the warmth and laughter and love that filled every corner. Behind them, the sun completed its descent, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of purple and gold. It was the end of another day, but it was also a continuation of a story that had begun with an act of courage and kindness. Blake had outbid the cruelest rancher for miles and rode away with Rose that day in Tombstone. But what he had really done was give them both a chance at happiness, at a life filled with purpose and love. And they had seized that chance with both hands, building something lasting and true. As they sat down to dinner, surrounded by children and grandchildren, the table full of good food and the room full of laughter, Rose caught Blake's eye and smiled. He smiled back, that same smile that had reassured her on their first night camping under the stars, and she knew with absolute certainty that everything had worked out exactly as it was meant to. They had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. They had chosen each other freely, completely. And they had built a love that would endure for all their days and beyond, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and nurtured with devotion and care. Later that evening, after the family had gone to their respective homes and the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Blake and Rose walked out to the small cemetery on the hill where Samuel was buried. It was something they did often, paying respects to the man who had given them their start. "We did right by you, old friend," Blake said quietly, standing before the simple headstone. "The ranch is thriving. The family is strong. We have tried to honor your memory in everything we do." Rose placed fresh flowers on the grave, a bouquet from her garden. "Thank you for believing in us, Samuel, for giving us a chance." As they turned to walk back to the house, Rose noticed Blake touch the scar on his neck, the one Mercer had given him years ago. It was a habit he had never lost, unconsciously seeking that reminder of how far they had come. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. Blake shook his head. "No, it is just a scar now, a memory of something that led me to you. I would bear 100 such scars if they all led me back to you." "Well, let us hope no more scarring is necessary," Rose said with a small laugh. "I prefer you intact." They walked hand in hand back to their house, where a lamp burned in the window to guide them home. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, every corner holding memories of their years together. Rose banked the fire while Blake checked the doors and windows, the familiar evening routine they had performed thousands of times. In their bedroom, Rose brushed out her long hair while Blake removed his boots and gun belt. These quiet domestic moments were among Rose's favorites, the simple intimacy of preparing for bed together, knowing they would wake up side by side in the morning. "Blake," Rose said as they settled into bed. "Yes. Do you remember what you told me that first night? That I was safe?" "I remember. I want you to know that I have felt safe every day since, safe and loved and cherished. You have given me everything I could have hoped for and more." Blake pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "You have given me just as much, Rose." You have given me a home, a family, a reason to build something lasting. You have given me purpose and joy. I was just drifting before I met you. Now I am anchored." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had built a beautiful life together. Outside, the New Mexico night was peaceful, stars blazing overhead, the land quiet and content. The next morning began like so many others, with breakfast preparations and morning chores. But as Rose worked in her garden and Blake met with his foreman to discuss the day's work, they both carried with them the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Michael rode up mid-morning with his wife and their two children, stopping by for a visit. Sarah arrived shortly after with her family, and suddenly the house was full of noise and laughter again. The grandchildren ran around the yard, playing games and helping feed the chickens. The adults gathered on the porch, drinking coffee and discussing ranch business and family news. Rose watched her family with deep contentment. This was what it had all been for, this abundance of love and life. She caught Blake's eye across the porch, and he winked at her, that same playful gesture he had used so many times over the years. "Grandma, tell us the story again," little Emma, Sarah's youngest, called out. "About how Grandpa saved you." Rose smiled. "That is a long story, sweetling." "We want to hear it," the other children chorused. So Rose told them, editing out the scarier parts but keeping the essence of the tale. She told them about the auction, about the cruel man who had wanted to buy her, about how Blake had appeared like a hero from a storybook and had bid so much money that he won. She told them about the journey to Santa Fe, about falling in love on the trail, about building their life together. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard the story many times before. It never got old, this tale of courage and love and second chances. "And they lived happily ever after," Emma sighed when Rose finished. "Just like in the fairy tales." "Not quite like a fairy tale," Blake interjected gently. "Fairy tales make it sound easy. Our happiness took work, took choosing each other every day, took compromise and patience and forgiveness. But yes, we have been very happy." "That is even better than a fairy tale," Michael said, smiling at his parents, "because it is real." The afternoon wore on with more stories, more laughter, more of the ordinary magic that filled their days. As evening approached and the families prepared to leave, Sarah hugged Rose tightly. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "For what, dear?" "For showing me what real love looks like. For teaching me that happiness is possible even after terrible things happen. For being strong enough to build this life." Rose hugged her daughter back, her eyes stinging with happy tears. "You have built a beautiful life of your own, Sarah. I am so proud of you." After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Blake and Rose sat together on the porch swing, gently rocking as the sun set. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Rose mused. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like we have always been together. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Good, because you are stuck with me." Blake kissed her temple gently. "Forever and always, Rose Donovan." "Forever and always," Rose echoed, content down to her bones. The years continued to pass in much the same way, full of work and family and love. Blake and Rose grew old together, their hair turning white, their movements slower, but their devotion to each other never diminishing. They saw their children raise families of their own, saw grandchildren grow up and start their own adventures. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a massive celebration. There were children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running around. The Donovan Ranch had become legendary in the territory, known for its success, but also for its fairness and generosity. At the party, Michael stood to make a speech. I want to thank my parents for everything they have given us. Not just this ranch, not just material success, but an example of how to live. They have shown us that love is a choice we make every day, that kindness matters, that second chances are worth taking. Dad, you saved Mom from a terrible fate. But Mom, you saved Dad too from a life without love. You saved each other, and in doing so, you gave all of us this incredible family. Everyone raised their glasses in a toast, and Blake and Rose looked at each other with tears in their eyes. Did we do good? Blake asked quietly. We did great, Rose assured him. We did better than I ever dreamed possible. They danced that night, slowly and carefully, but with all the love they had carried for each other for 30 years. Around them, their family danced too, celebrating not just an anniversary but the legacy of love that Blake and Rose had created. As they grew even older, Blake and Rose spent more time sitting on their porch, watching the ranch operations continue without their constant involvement. Michael was fully capable of running things now, with Sarah's husband managing the horse program expertly. They were free to simply enjoy each other's company, to remember and laugh and occasionally doze in the afternoon sun. "You have any regrets?" Rose asked one day when she was 75 and Blake was nearly 80. Blake thought carefully before answering. "Only one. That I did not kiss you sooner. We wasted those first few weeks on the trail before I admitted how I felt." Rose laughed, the sound still musical despite her age. "We were being careful, feeling our way. It was the right pace for us. Maybe, but still, I could have had a few more kisses." "Well, you can make up for it now." Rose leaned over and kissed him gently. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for it," Blake promised, and he did. Every day, he found new ways to show Rose he loved her, from bringing her flowers from the garden to simply holding her hand as they watched the sunset. Rose, in turn, made sure Blake knew how deeply he was appreciated, how profoundly he had changed her life for the better. One evening, as they sat together watching another spectacular New Mexico sunset, Blake said quietly, "I want you to know something, Rose. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me better than I was. You gave me purpose and joy and love beyond measure. Whatever happens, wherever we go from here, I want you to know that I have lived a full and happy life because of you." Rose felt tears slide down her weathered cheeks. "I feel the same way, Blake. You saved me, not just from Mercer, but from a life without love. You showed me what it means to be cherished, to be valued, to be truly seen. I love you more than words can express." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and had chosen to walk through life together. Whatever time they had left, they would spend it together, just as they had spent every day since that fateful auction in Tombstone. Blake passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 82. He simply did not wake up one morning, his hand still holding Rose's. The doctor said his heart had given out, but Rose knew the truth. Blake's heart had been given to her decades ago, and he had spent every beat of it loving her. Rose missed him terribly, but she did not despair. They had had 42 years together, 42 years of love and laughter and partnership. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she would not tarnish that blessing with excessive grief. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with family, tending her garden and often sitting on the porch talking to Blake as if he could still hear her. Maybe he could. She liked to think so. On a warm spring morning, Rose passed away quietly in her sleep, a peaceful smile on her face. Her family laid her to rest beside Blake on the hill, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple but eloquent. Blake Donovan, beloved husband, father, and friend, he chose love. Rose Donovan, beloved wife, mother, and friend, she chose love and below both names, a single shared inscription: together always. The Donovan Ranch continued to thrive under Michael's management, and then under his children after him, a lasting testament to the foundation Blake and Rose had built. But more than the ranch, their real legacy was the family they had created, the values they had instilled, and the love story they had lived. Future generations would tell the tale of how their great-great-grandparents met at an auction, how Blake had saved Rose from a cruel fate, how they had fallen in love on the trail to Santa Fe. The story would grow and evolve with each telling, but the heart of it remained true. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build a life of love and meaning together. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the daily choice to love, to honor, to cherish. Blake and Rose had made that choice every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and enduring. Their story became local legend, shared at family gatherings and told to wide-eyed children. It was a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that courage and kindness can change lives, and that choosing each other every single day is the greatest adventure of all. And so the legacy of Blake and Rose Donovan lived on, not just in the ranch that bore their name or the descendants who carried their blood, but in the example they had set and the love story they had written across the wild landscape of the American West. It was a story of second chances and brave choices, of unexpected love and enduring devotion, a story that proved that sometimes, just sometimes, the greatest treasures are found in the most unlikely places, and the truest love begins with a single act of courage. They had both been lost when they found each other in Tombstone on that hot August day in 1882. But in finding each other, they had found themselves, their purpose, their home. And they had built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy of love that would inspire generations to come. The end.